Imagine a pitch so absolutely intoxicating, so masterfully delivered that it convinces the most ruthless, calculated financial minds on the planet to open their wallets without a second of hesitation. Picture a room full of elite venture capitalists, people who literally make their living poking holes in business models. Now, imagine a mysterious startup walking into that boardroom with nothing but a rough prototype, some incredibly bold claims, and a vision of conquering a market nobody even knew existed. They were speaking the absolute ultimate language of modern business. Proprietary hardware locking consumers into a lifetime of recurring revenue. It was a financial fairy tale, right? A totally closed, high-tech ecosystem. The excitement in the tech world was palpable. The momentum felt completely unstoppable, and the funds just flowed like a river. But beneath the glossy, high-tech surface of this multi-million-dollar dream lay a fatal flaw. A flaw so impossibly basic, so completely obvious in hindsight, that it would eventually trigger one of the most spectacular, humiliating corporate implosions in modern business history. $120 million. Just let that massive number sink in for a second. We really need to put this in perspective from a business standpoint. This wasn't revenue. This wasn't profit. This was raw, speculative venture capital poured into a single, highly secretive vision. Normally, a typical startup scrapes together a few $100,000 in seed funding, right? They build a minimum viable product, test it out in the actual market, get some feedback, and pray for user traction. But not these guys. This company managed to amass a staggering $120 million war chest before a single product was ever shipped to a paying consumer. It was a massive, absolutely unprecedented financial bet on a completely unproven consumer market.
Okay, let's dive into this. What exactly does $120 million of elite Silicon Valley venture capital actually buy you? Well, in this case, it bought the unprecedented rise and the spectacular, humiliating fall of a company called Juicero. This wasn't supposed to be just another product launch. The founders intended this to be a massive cultural phenomenon. It was an insanely ambitious attempt to completely reinvent a fundamental human activity through complex engineering and hyper-aggressive Silicon Valley economics. As you're going to see, it is an absolute masterclass in what happens when brilliant engineering operates completely devoid of financial constraints and market reality.
Section 1. Silicon Valley's $12 million dream. From a loft in Chinatown to a tech world darling.
The mastermind behind all this was a guy named Doug Evans. He was a wildly successful natural foods pioneer who basically wanted to do for home juicing what Keurig did for coffee. And with his very successful track record from founding the Organic Avenue juice chain, Evans didn't just find standard investors, he attracted absolute titans of industry. We're talking about Google Ventures, Kleiner Perkins, and even traditional food behemoths like Campbell's Soup lining up to hand him capital. And the hype completely transcended the financial sector. Oprah Winfrey praised it, Gwyneth Paltrow's lifestyle brand Goop declared it the absolute best of 2016 in January of that year. From an investment standpoint, the thesis was just irresistible. It's called the hardware as a service model. You sell the physical machine as the platform, and then you generate endless recurring revenue from the proprietary consumables. It's the classic razor and blades business model, updated for the modern digital age. And honestly, Silicon Valley was so blinded by the financial upside of that recurring revenue, they just stopped asking basic questions.
To really understand the pitch that locked in all that VC money, you have to understand the product itself. Cold-press juicing is a high-pressure extraction method. Unlike your typical centrifugal juicers, the ones that use fast-spinning blades that heat up and oxidize the produce, cold pressing uses raw crushing force and extracts the absolute maximum amount of nutrients. But doing it at home requires intense manual labor. You're peeling, you're dicing, and then washing all this bulky, sticky machinery. Evans convinced these elite investors that to bring true commercial-grade cold-pressed juice into the consumer's kitchen, an incredibly powerful precision-engineered machine was required. And so he priced this countertop marvel at a staggering $699.
Section 2. The anatomy of overengineering. Peeling back the glossy plastic.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer financial absurdity of this bill of materials. When you are building a hardware startup, the absolute golden rule is to use standard, off-the-shelf components to keep your manufacturing costs down. Juicero ignored this entirely. They built this thing more like commercial food service equipment than a home appliance. They designed a custom high-voltage power supply, which is an exceptionally rare and incredibly risky move because of the strict, expensive safety certification costs involved. Inside this thing, there were 8 painstakingly CNC machine aluminum structural parts. Machine parts are notoriously expensive because the cost doesn't drop significantly as you scale up production. Hardware experts estimated these parts alone made up over 50% of the machine's entire cost. The drivetrain utilized expensive hardened steel spur gears and ball bearings. The manufacturing cost was astronomically high. virtually guaranteeing they were actually losing money on every single $699 machine they sold.
And nothing highlights this runaway engineering better than the door latch. Just the mechanism to keep the machine's front door closed was a marvel of completely unnecessary complexity. It utilized 10 custom injection molded parts, a solenoid, its own entirely dedicated motor and controller board, stamped steel, a gear, and multiple pins and springs. Think about that for a second. All of this engineering capital, all of this assembly time, all of this potential point of failure risk devoted to a single, completely mundane task, keeping a small metal door shut. It was a textbook example of designers going absolutely wild with a blank checkbook from their investors.
But why on earth was it built like a literal tank? Well, because of this number, 8,000. The core mechanical problem that Juicero engineers set out to solve was how to apply thousands of pounds of force, up to 8,000 pounds, equally across roughly 64 square inches of surface area, all simultaneously. The machine had to generate enough torque to literally flatten a proprietary bag of chopped produce into a liquid. To handle that kind of immense pressure without just exploding all over your kitchen counter, the machine had to feature massive aluminum plates, an Acme screw, and a heavy-duty framework.
Section 3. The Wi-Fi Juice Subscription. Connected to the internet, disconnected from reality. So, as we established, the intricately over-engineered machine was practically a loss leader. The real business, the engine that made those venture capitalists salivate, was a closed ecosystem of proprietary chopped vegetable packs processed in a massive 111,000 square foot facility. The consumer experience was a four-step ecosystem. First, you lock yourself into a subscription, paying $5 to $7 per produce pack. When you're ready for juice, you insert the pack into the machine. But here is where the business model gets truly dystopian. The machine connects to your home Wi-Fi and uses a built-in camera to scan a QR code on the back of the pouch. It cross-references an online database to ensure the pack hasn't expired or been recalled. Only then, and literally only then, will the machine press the juice. The CEO defended this as a vital food safety feature, but critics immediately identified it for what it truly was from a business perspective: digital rights management. It was a digital lock ensuring you could only ever use official Juicero vegetable packs in your Juicero machine.
Section 4. The Bloomberg Reality Check, the fatal flaw of unconstrained development.
By April 2017, sales were already sluggish. But the true fatal blow came when journalists decided to try something unbelievably simple with those high-tech juice packs. And this brilliantly illustrates the devastating reality they uncovered. You have a $400 marvel of Silicon Valley engineering, because they had to discount it from $6.99 by this point, taking 2 whole minutes to press a glass of juice. Contrast that with a regular pair of human hands. Cost, free. Time, 90 seconds. Output, nearly identical. Because the produce inside the proprietary bags was already finely diced by the factory, a human hand wringing the bag like a wet towel could extract the juice faster than the machine could. They completely bypassed the Wi-Fi. They bypassed the QR scanner. They bypassed the 8,000 pounds of mechanical force. The entire foundational premise of the $120 million company was utterly, embarrassingly invalidated.
The media published a video of this hand-squeezing realization, and it went catastrophically viral. The financial backlash was swift and it was ruthless. Bloomberg published a quote from an anonymous investor that summed up the venture capital panic perfectly. "If I knew that Doug was hawking bags of juice, we never would have met with him." Overnight, the narrative completely flipped. Juicero went from being a celebrated darling of high-tech innovation to becoming the ultimate punching bag and poster child for Silicon Valley excess. It was a massive embarrassment for some of the smartest money in the tech world.
Section 5. Fall of the Empire, a spectacular collapse.
The brevity of the company's public life is just staggering. They spent years burning capital in stealth development to build their massive factory and their wildly over-engineered machine. They finally launched in March 2016 at $699. Just 10 months later, poor sales force a massive price drop to $399. 3 months after that, the Bloomberg hand-squeezing expose hits the internet. By September 2017, operations are completely suspended. The company was desperately searching for a buyer to sell off its intellectual property for pennies on the dollar. $120 million vaporized in just 18 months on the open market.
But here is a truly fascinating piece of data about consumer psychology. Despite the immense public humiliation, the viral mockery, and the company explicitly offering a full, no-questions-asked refund, only about 3% of customers actually return their machines.
The reality is, the luxury market actually liked the product. They enjoyed the convenience, they loved the fresh juice, and they honestly didn't care that they could squeeze it by hand. They were paying for the premium experience. But a 3% return rate from a very small niche luxury user base wasn't nearly enough to sustain a company burning through cash with a massive factory and hundreds of employees.
Which leads us to the final chapter, Section 6, the founder's low-tech aftermath, from venture capital to the Mojave Desert.
Doug Evans, who had actually stepped down from the CEO role before the Bloomberg article even hit, retreated to the remote Mojave Desert. He meditated, went to hot springs, and stepped away from the aggressive world of venture capital entirely. And his worldview shifted drastically. So the crucial point is how wildly he pivoted. He went from the Juicero model, $7 a serving, entirely reliant on a 111,000 square foot factory and absurdly complex refrigeration supply chains, to the Sprout model, growing your own food in a basic glass jar right on your kitchen counter for about 50 cents a serving. No soil, no Wi-Fi, just seeds and water. He went from the most over-engineered delivery mechanism in history to the most accessible and democratized form of nutrition on the planet.
Doug literally wrote a book called The Sprout Book and became an evangelical advocate for growing your own food at home. As he beautifully noted regarding his entire journey, every problem that was exposed with Juicero actually is eliminated or alleviated with Sprouts. He demonstrated an incredible amount of personal resilience, fully digesting the catastrophic failure of his venture-backed business and pivoting to a solution that requires absolutely zero tech, zero venture capital funding, and absolutely no Wi-Fi connection.
It leaves us with a profound lesson about the nature of business and innovation. Juicero stands as a monument to what happens when you try to solve a problem with endless money instead of clever constraints. But it also begs a deeper question for you to consider. Is unconstrained technological development the ultimate trap for a business, blinding it to reality? Or is it sometimes a necessary, albeit incredibly expensive, stepping stone for founders to eventually discover the profound value of true simplicity? Something to really think about the next time you're pitched a revolutionary, internet-connected appliance. See you in the next explainer.